Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are doing a deep dive into an emotion that is, well, it's as ancient as humanity itself.
Mm.
Envy.
Mm.
We all feel it, that sharp, uncomfortable desire for something someone else has.
And while that gut punch feeling is universal, the way societies treat it, whether they suppress it or celebrate it or even fear it, that fundamentally dictates their economic structure, their social norms, their daily relationships.
Yeah, this is so much more than just a passing emotion.
Yeah, it really is.
Our sources, and they draw on everyone from anthropologists like George Foster to philosophers like René Girard, they give us a really crisp starting point.
They do. Envy is universally recognized as a negative response to someone else's superior quality or possession.
Right, and it's coupled with either a desire to acquire that thing or, this is the darker side,
A wish that the envied person lacked it entirely.
it's the definition of a primal human conflict. I mean, you look at the earliest stories, like the biblical story of Cain and Abel.
Absolutely. The ultimate destructive act there is rooted entirely in Cain's envy over Abel's favored offering.
And that's why this deep dive is so necessary, because if we only look at envy through, say, a single cultural lens, we
Yes.
completely misunderstand its global impact.
I do.
So that's the mission today. We're going to contrast how Western culture approaches envy, mostly boxing it up as an internal sort of solvable psychological emotion,
Right.
versus how African societies often treat it, where it's an external potent social force that drives behavior and links directly to concepts that Westerners would call witchcraft.
And you can't understand any of it without grasping those underlying philosophies.
Exactly.
So let's start with the Western experience. The sources point out that for centuries, especially since the Enlightenment, the attribution of misfortune has it's undergone a massive shift.
Okay.
We moved away from blaming external forces, curses or witches, to finding internal physical causes for things.
So you're talking about the rise of science, basically. The universe stops being this mysterious, capricious place.
Exactly. And it starts being viewed like a complex machine.
A machine where every single effect has to have a physical, verifiable cause.
Precisely. And this is where the philosophy of positivism, the idea that you can only verify reality through empirical sciences, had such a profound effect.
Ah, I see.
It essentially forced envy out of the realm of real social forces and sort of relegated it to a mere psychological emotion, something non-physical, secondary to rational human life.
So if I feel envy, society tells me it's an internal failing. It's something I need to manage or transmute.
And you certainly don't want to admit it.
No way, because then I carry the social stigma of being an envious person.
Exactly. As the philosopher John Elster noted, to avoid that stigma, we often transmute envy into other more socially acceptable feelings.
Like what?
Well, we say we're upset because we want acceptance or popularity or simple justice instead of just admitting.
That we wish the other person didn't have that cool car or that great job.
Right. And this cultural suppression means we often fail to recognize the need to counter envy directly.
And contemporary psychology has spent, what, decades trying to put a taxonomy on this suppressed feeling? We're listing categories now.
Yeah.
Right? Like Pertassi's 4 types.
Yeah.
Emulative, inert, aggressive, and spiteful.
Yeah, but the big split that most people recognize is malicious versus benign envy.
Okay.
Malicious envy is that destructive wish, for the other person to lose what they have. But benign envy, that's framed as a positive thing, a motivational force.
It's supposed to inspire you to work harder.
Right. It provides a motivation to reach a standard of excellence, as Kahn and Noor suggest. It's supposed to be the engine of self-improvement.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because we have to challenge that benign envy concept. On the surface, it sounds like healthy aspiration. I see your success, and I'm going to work toward my own.
But the sources suggest this idea, when you adopt it societally, creates some really serious drawbacks.
How so?
Well, if your motivation is rooted in emulating what someone else has, rather than pursuing an objective, rational goal, you're setting yourself up for failure. It aggravates feelings of inadequacy.
And can lead to self-loathing if you fall short.
Mm-hmm. And it encourages deception.
That whole fake it till you make it strategy.
Yes. Which Dawson discusses as a form of community harm. It's inherently dishonest.
And I think anyone who's ever logged onto LinkedIn or, Instagram knows exactly what that pressure feels like.
Oh, absolutely.
You're measuring your success not by your actual output, but by the number of admirers or the perceived glamour of your life. Success becomes this this popularity contest.
And that's why the sources conclude that Western scholarship, which is largely driven by psychological models, tends to overrate the individual experience. It focuses on how you handle your emotions.
And in doing so, it largely overlooks how envy functions as a binding or a destructive community mechanism,
We've internalized the problem so much that we forgot its social power.
which provides the perfect pivot to the African context where
Yeah.
envy is. Well, it's anything but a private emotion.
Right.
If the West buries envy, let's look at what happens when a society forces it right out into the open.
And the contrast is just, well, it's stark. In many traditional African contexts, people take others' envy as the primary basis for any misfortune they experience.
So if your crops fail or your child gets sick,
Or the house burns down, you look outward, not inward. Therefore, success isn't just about hard work. It's about actively countering or minimizing the envy others feel towards you.
wow. So envy is a major recognized driver of daily life.
It is, and this is where that connection to witchcraft comes in, which can be so easily misinterpreted by Western listeners as just, magical superstition.
Right.
So it's crucial to clarify this anthropological distinction. When the sources refer to envy translating into witchcraft, they aren't describing spells or potions in the fantasy sense.
So what are they describing?
It's a sociocultural mechanism. It's a way of externalizing and dealing with powerful, potentially destructive interhuman fears. Intense envy, anger, suspicion, lust. It provides a structured way for the community to talk about and address these social tensions.
It's a system of social accountability then.
In a way, yes, but that sounds incredibly stressful for anyone who achieves even modest success. If my gain means someone else's potential loss, I'm putting myself in danger just by doing well.
You've hit on the core philosophical difference, the concept of limited good.
Limited good.
Yeah, George Foster theorized that many subsistence societies operate under the suspicion that wealth, health, and status, they exist in a fixed quantity, like a fixed pie.
So if I have a bigger slice,
Your slice must have shrunk. This means your success implies my loss, and therefore my envy is justified.
wow, that totally reframes what success even is.
So if you're the one being envied, what are the specific social strategies you have to use to survive and prosper in a community like that?
You have to actively reduce or obscure the quality that is envied. This means deliberately understating your assets.
So what, you might give away part of your cattle herd?
You might. Or you might deliberately delay completing the roof on your new house to avoid attracting attention. You might eat only in the deepest privacy of your home to avoid being seen with too much food. So the goal is to avoid becoming an envy target.
Exactly. And this isn't just charity or generosity. It's a specific, codified strategy to prevent social disaster.
So if you don't hide your wealth, you're socially condemned as selfish or even dangerous.
Precisely. If you fail to obscure your success, you're signaling selfishness, and you're inviting the destructive power of others' envy, which, remember, manifests as witchcraft or misfortune.
There's an example, right? In Luoland, Kenya.
Yes, the practice of mos.
Yeah.
People will loan cattle to others, distributing the milk and dung to the temporary caretakers.
And this practice obscures the identity of the true owner.
And it physically distributes the product, thereby shielding the original owner from being targeted by envy.
The effort involved in just existing, let alone improving, sounds immense. I imagine even casual conversation is just fraught with danger.
It is. Asking for specific personal or financial information can be interpreted as implying envy that you're mentally trying to measure and take something.
So people will just lie.
They might tell outright untruths or vague stories to inquiries about their family size, job prospects, or holdings, just to mislead potential enviers.
And this community protection, it also leads to that powerful obligation to share, which seems very visible.
It is an iron rule, especially with food. If a visitor arrives and the household is eating, that visitor must be included.
Refusing to share is a huge faux pas.
It's heavily frowned upon because it implies you are hoarding the limited good. The pressure to share is a necessary lubricant to keep the whole social system moving.
But the sources also discuss the negative side of this forced sharing. It seems to create a paradox for people who genuinely want to help others.
It creates a heavy restriction on behavior. The obligation to share actually discourages people from visiting the poor, the hungry, or the sick,
Unless
they bring a very generous gift. If you visit someone in need without a gift or with uncertain motives, you raise the suspicion of the host.
they're wondering, are you there to poison them or are you acting out of spite? Maybe because you envy their remaining possessions.
Exactly. Shook notes that people in need are sometimes simply left to their fate. if visitors fear arousing that unassuaged envy. The system meant to protect the community ends up isolating the most vulnerable.
Wow. Yeah, that is a really striking consequence. Okay, let's move to how this envy is expressed toward outsiders, especially wealthy ones. It seems to be done much more openly, sometimes with humor, as a kind of social test.
The open verbalization of desire for another's possession is a massive cultural difference. In European customs, that kind of behavior is seen as childish or unacceptable, something you suppress.
But in the African context, it can be a direct, recognized demand.
This is best illustrated by the anecdotes. Let's take that specific example of an outsider wearing good shoes in a village. A local villager might jokingly say,
Give me your shoes.
"Give me your shoes." That's the test. The outsider is expected to respond in kind, maybe with a self-deprecating joke.
Yeah.
But if the outsider fails the test, if they literally hand over the shoes,
And they have severely misinterpreted the dynamic.
completely. They turn a humorous comment into a serious expectation of acquisition. They create a relationship of dependency and invite ongoing serious requests rooted in envy.
It reminds me of the example of the British colleague walking in southern Africa who was just completely deflated when a young man walked up and bluntly asked, "Give me $1."
Yeah. The European mind immediately assumes a shared, friendly interaction.
Whereas the African interpretation was a demand rooted in envy and a sense of justice. I am poor and so deserving of that dollar, whereas you, the outsider, obviously have too much wealth.
The sources highlight that openly verbalizing this desire is a socially sanctioned way of applying pressure.
And this open asking, this expectation, it's woven into the economic fabric. The source notes that African people often live beyond their means. They might enroll in college without the funds, fully expecting to ask for help later.
Because having a surplus is intrinsically associated with selfishness and danger due to the fear of being envied.
This is a major paradox when we talk about development. Formal education in Africa is largely an imitation of foreign models, often taught in colonial languages. This structure, it's rooted in an envious desire for what the West has.
Which leads to curricula that frequently have little local fit.
And this desire for the status of Western education makes it difficult for African people to think for themselves or innovate locally without that thinking being immediately condemned as inferior.
And the high standards and expense of Western material wealth, and now the increasing visibility of that wealth through the internet, it means African people often put direct envy pressure on the West for financial help, pleading poverty.
This brings us to a controversial yet critical observation from the source material.
Okay.
The West's massive response, the flow of aid, sponsorships, bursaries, subsidies, can be interpreted functionally as a societal response to the fear of envy. Since envy is understood in these cultures as the powerhouse of witchcraft and misfortune, responding with material provision becomes a way for the West to mitigate or buy off that destructive social force.
Whether or not the aid donors even realize that's the underlying dynamic.
Exactly. The West, in effect, risks rewarding overt envy.
That is profound and shocking. It suggests that aid isn't just a charitable act, it's a complicated mechanism for cross-cultural tension management. And this whole dynamic leads to the observation that envy can, in some contexts, fulfill the same societal role as God.
How does the source material support that comparison?
It's a mechanism of provision. If you lack food or wealth, you have traditional recourse. You can pray to God for provision, trusting in faith.
Yeah.
Alternatively, and maybe more immediately effective in a limited good society, you can make it pointedly clear to those who do have food or wealth that you are desperately envious of them.
And the successful person gives you what you need out of fear.
Out of fear of your envy's potential for destruction. The mechanism related to envy produces the goods, and thus envy becomes a functional source of provision, often displacing or complicating the role of trust and faith.
So, what does this all mean for us?
I mean, the core contrast is just undeniable. Western life treats envy as a solvable, internal, psychological problem, something to be suppressed and medicated.
While traditional African life treats it as an external, powerful social force that dictates economic behavior, relationships, and even drives the dynamics of global development and aid dependency.
The source materials argue strongly that envy comprises a very serious barrier to human progress and prosperity, at least prosperity rooted in objectivity and truth.
If every success is greeted with fear of envy, it's impossible to invest for the long term or strive for excellence without significant social cost.
And historically, we see that some scholars, including Schoch and Girard, attribute the historical suppression of destructive envy in the West primarily to Christianity. They view envy as sin.
And they argue that the solution offered was a mental transformation moving away from the crippling fear of envy toward trust in a transcendent, non-finite source of provision, traditionally God.
And crucially, this involves replacing models for imitation. Girard's work emphasizes that imitating other people just leads to rivalry and violence. The solution offered historically was to replace human models of desire.
With the imitation of Christ, who self-sacrificially gave everything, thereby displacing the need for scapegoating, or as you see in Africa witchcraft, by offering a path away from that mimetic violence.
And that transformation provides societal relief from the pressure of the fixed pie mentality.
Yeah.
Consider this. Psychology and secular society today struggle to solve a problem they have defined down to a mere internal emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, we live in a world of increasing global connectivity, where the constant curated visibility of wealth via the internet makes every single person an object of global envy.
So if Western societies once successfully suppressed envy through philosophy and faith, are we now unknowingly rewarding it through the very mechanisms of social media engagement and certain aid practices?
Are we, in the process of globalization, pushing the modern experience closer to those crippling community pressures described in Africa?
It raises a really important question. Can a globalized world, perpetually displaying the disparity of wealth on its screens, truly afford to keep treating envy as just a minor internal emotion?